This seemed targeted at multiple different audiences, the party itself, the domestic broader audience, and the international audience as well. What for you were the key takeaways?
Well, first of all, Tom, you stole my initial talking point, was that I heard at least 3 or 4 different messages here. Obviously, to the Chinese people, the message one was of the party's ability to deliver prosperity, but as Xi mentioned, high quality growth, but also shared prosperity. Of course, there's a question of how real that is, but nonetheless, that was a core message. I think the other interesting message was in his section on the governance of the party. You notice he uses this term, the self-governance of the party. And the message there with that word self is essentially, we, the party, see the problems that you, the Chinese people, see in corruption and bureaucratism, but we're going to handle it ourselves. We don't need any outside or democratic participation in this process. We see these problems. And then just finally, and I think your colleague was just saying this, and Tom, you yourself mentioned that extraordinarily striking line, which will no doubt be in every headline tomorrow, of Xi saying, if you bully China, you're on a collision course with a steel wall forged by 1.4 billion Chinese people. The number of applause lines here that were provoked by calls to nationalism, strength, sovereignty was really, really quite striking. And I think very much is in keeping with Xi's deep, deep nationalist orientation for China.
Jude, how resilient is this political organization as we look now to the Congress next year and what is likely to be a third term for Xi Jinping?
Yeah, another, Xi's comment here that the party is in its prime is of course also attempting to get ahead of a narrative that I'm sure he's well aware of, which is we tend to think Leninist parties have outlived themselves and they're just on their last quarter tank of gas. It would be, of course, silly as we mark 100 years of the Communist Party to say that this is a declining organization. But critically, Tom, to your point, I think it's the next 10 years that the party needs to be worried about in terms of resiliency. And just to mention, a few points. One is we've never had, since the death of Mao, the Communist Party run by essentially an autocrat, unconstrained by elite politics. And if he takes a third term as general secretary next year, which he undoubtedly will, that's going to raise some important black swans about leadership succession, about stability at the top. So it is really the next 10 years under Xi that I think will really stress the party as it combines both this global integration, this intense desire for modernization, but really with some outdated political architecture of one-man rule.
Jude, David here, just to follow up on that, the ability to deliver prosperity, eradicate poverty, that's almost the last 2-3 decade story, I would imagine gives the party, to Xi's point, that they are in their prime. How do you think the party, political structures, power structures, decision-making structures, particularly as it pertains to an increasingly complex economy that's now very, very increasingly difficult to manage, how do you think the party needs to adapt?
That's a really profound question, because the key attribute of the party's resiliency over 4 decades has been adaptability. It's been pragmatism and the ability to shift and create new structures as you deal with new exigencies of domestic challenges and growth imperatives, but also international needs and the needs to integrate into the global economy and global order. Right now, this is a really important transition moment for China. The growth rate China has now reflects the growth drivers of the past decade. Those are now running out of steam. And so the question that Beijing wrestles with very publicly, by the way, this is not a secret, is how do we power growth moving forward? And for Xi, the answer is technology, that we're going to get massive productivity gains through these significant scaled investments into critical and emerging technologies. But they have to really answer some key questions of, we're going to do that more with state funding and state guidance rather than using market players, which we have for most of the reform and opening period. And of course, China's international development space is not as benign as it was up until 2016. You have a number of countries responding to Xi's political economy as well as his wolf warrior posture, United States, Canada, UK, the EU, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, the major developed economies, were very, very skeptical about Chinese investment. So the growth environment for China is really challenging over the next 10 years. And the key question is going to be, with Xi in charge for a decade, are course corrections going to be possible? And unfortunately, the historical record there is, absolute power doesn't usually lead to a sort of a more pragmatic, flexible attitude. And I think that's a real concern.
Jude, Stephen Engel here in Hong Kong. I was wondering if you read the tea leaves a little bit on Xi's messaging for Hong Kong. Obviously, they've been resolute in their application of the national security law over the last 365 days. And also, separate to that, but also sort of tied under the reunification master plan, is Taiwan. Did you get anything different from his messaging on Taiwan, that it is the party's mission to reunify with Taiwan?
Well, I was just listening to your comments before I came on. I think you hit it well. On Hong Kong, the message was, even though I don't know if you heard, Xi briefly mentioned, Hong Kong and Macau have a high degree of autonomy, but then he immediately transitioned to the talking point, which is stability and security. There's a long portion of the speech on national security, which of course is the dominant, operative for Xi Jinping in policy making. And so I think if you're trying to read the tea leaves on Hong Kong, I see no course correction here. This is national security as a legal infrastructure and a bureaucratic infrastructure. Stay the course. It's going to grind and grind and grind and grind. So that's not so much tea leaves reading as just my understanding of Xi's view of Taiwan, or excuse me, of Hong Kong. On Taiwan, quickly, the language he used, the volume was up to 11, but the phrases about, complete reunification, being the will of the Chinese people and our resolute determination, that's stock standard messaging. There was nothing here that indicated timeline acceleration or change in tactics. So I would say nothing there that indicated that China was going to press the gas more, but certainly nothing that indicated that they were going to let up on gas. And so I think we should expect that Taiwan Straits is going to be a sporty region for the near future, even if I don't think we should be worrying that Xi is going to launch some unprovoked invasion of the island in the near term.